is Ron Loca, and I'm co-chairman with my friend Gary Rock. We're putting this on for the benefit, for your benefit and our benefit, in the sense that we are all members of the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, and I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I have a short testimonial that I'd like to start with, and we'll go on from there. I live in Whitby, and the short testimonial is my childhood experience with the CBC. My father sailed to England with his regiment in 1940, so I was raised by my mother and my grandparents in Montreal. My grandfather was from England, and my grandmother was French-Canadian. And in our house, whoever turned on the radio determined what language we would hear for the day. Whenever there was a report from the war front, we would huddle around the radio and listen to shortwave radio broadcasts from people like Matthew Halton or his French counterpart. Although the war was fought in Europe, I felt great concern when I was told that German U-boats sank some of our ships in the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. However, the tide of war quickly changed, and we sort of gained confidence at that point. When the war was won, we were so proud of our soldiers, and everyone felt really patriotic. Now, these feelings are not easily forgotten. So let me fast forward to the last Quebec referendum. Mr. Parizeau, Premier of Quebec at the time, claimed that he had lost the referendum to separate from Canada because of money and the ethnic vote. Well, I say he was wrong. It was 5 French words that did the trick. And these were, "Vous écoutez CBC Radio-Canada." The CBC has been helping us explore our history, helping us to develop our cultures, giving us a better understanding of who we are as a nation, and telling us and reminding us how lucky we all are to be Canadian. Some people say that the CBC is too expensive. I say that a united Canada is priceless. I invited the candidates on behalf of Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, and I am co-chairman with my friend Gary Rock, as I mentioned. And it's an honor and a great privilege that I can introduce to you tonight's moderator, Mr. Ian Morrison. Mr. Morrison was instrumental in the creation of Friends of Broadcasting in 1985. He represented Friends of Canadian Broadcasting with the media and in public presentations such as the CRTC hearings. Mr. Morrison has chaired candidates meeting on Canadian ownership of media during the by-election in Vancouver Quadra. Ian Morrison is the former president of Frontier College and the former executive director of the Canadian Association for Adult Education. He presently lives in Toronto, and I'm most pleased to welcome Mr. Ian Morrison.
I was hearing all those formers. It reminded me, I'm sure it wasn't that, by the way, is the signal.
I'm sorry.
wanted you to hear it before I applied to you. It reminds me of a statement that one of the people who founded the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, the late Dalton Kemp, once said. Somebody accused him of being a has-been, former this, former that. And remember that line? I'd rather be a has-been than a never was or a never will be. But I just want to get right on with it tonight because your time is valuable, the candidates' time is valuable, and I want to thank them on your behalf at the outset for finding the time to be here. The Conservative candidate, Pat Perkins, did respond to our invitation. She said she had a prior engagement and couldn't be with us tonight. If Pat Perkins said it, it must be true. Okay. And so what I want to do is explain to you the format for this event. I've taken some time to explain it to the candidates, and it was not a surprise because when we invited them, we gave them a format for this event. The way things will work. Well, first, this is not an all candidates meeting. This is a candidates forum. We've invited candidates representing political parties who have current representation in the House of Commons, okay? And 3 of the 4 candidates we invited have accepted. But the topic of the forum is the future of public broadcasting in Canada. So we're not talking about infrastructure, we're not talking about foreign policy, we're not talking about health. Although, I suppose metaphorically, public broadcasting and health go together in view of your comments. But so if there are at any point questions that do not relate to public broadcasting, broadly understood, I would just say to you politely, if there's time at the end, we could deal with that. By the way, once in the city of Victoria, somebody really wanted to talk about sewers. And finally we got to the end of the meeting and they talked about sewers. But the format for tonight is that the candidates will each get 3 minutes to make an opening statement. They're completely at liberty to use the 3 minutes as they see fit, and that cricket will sound once they go past the 3 minutes. And then we'll take questions from you. And the way that will work, because this is being recorded for a larger audience, we're going to be sending out by email to people who could not be here tonight the information on this well in advance of Election Day. Because of that, everything has to run through a microphone. And so I have a microphone here. Each of the candidates has a microphone. And what we're asking you to do is to take cards that are available throughout the evening. There are volunteers who will pass out the cards on a little pencil. And so you write the question down. It comes to me. I read it. The candidates get to talk about it. They get to talk about it for 1 minute each. And we alternate the order in order to make things fair. And then as we round up in an hour or so, there will be concluding statements by the candidates, and those statements can be 2 minutes in duration, and they will be in the opposite order of the initial statements. And the candidates have drawn lots, so randomly they have been assigned a certain order. So that is basically what we're doing tonight. And I thank you very much. This is a very well-attended event, and I'm delighted that you're here to join us. So to start off, the first candidate who will speak for up to 3 minutes is Trish McAuliffe, who is the New Democratic Party candidate. And Trish, you're most welcome to use either this place here or to sit at your seat. Your choice. Okay.
Thank you. Just checking my microphone. Thank you and welcome everyone this evening. It's a very large privilege to be a candidate in this very important election to send the Harper government a message, a very clear message of the people's desire of the Whitby Oshawa riding. And just on the topics that we speak tonight, very important topics, I'd just like to open with, as a strong supporter of the CBC, a lifelong viewer, but most importantly, a child-cherished memory of a personal experience at the age of 7 when I was able to be summoned to attend the Bozo show at the Windsor CBC station. And that was something that stuck with me for a very long time, and the importance of having a public a public broadcaster in the community that brought so much flavor and fun and excitement to the lives of children in our community that we could tour and be a part of that fantastic studio at the waterfront in Windsor. I was very privileged then too. So I'm happy to be here tonight to discuss this important topic because I know that CBC is not only a cultural institution in our country, but also a key part of the media landscape that holds governments to account. Since the Second World War, the CBC has been a reflection of our national conversation. The CBC has become an institution as important to our Canadian identity as healthcare and saying sorry. That's why the relentless attacks by the Liberal and Conservative governments are not only misguided, but just plain wrong. In the 1990s, the Liberals cut over $400 million from the CBC. And in 2012 and 2014, the Conservatives cut $245 million. Both of these Liberal and Conservative cuts have put CBC management in the impossible position of deciding, for example, between selling advertising and cutting program, putting up paywalls, or cutting investment in emerging Canadian talent. That could have been me. It's often forgotten that the CBC is a talent incubator for Canada's arts and culture sector, which the Conference Board of Canada estimates is worth $80 billion of GDP. A weakened CBC is not only bad for Canadian culture independence, it's bad for the economy. As I mentioned, it's also bad for our ability to know what our government is up to. Just as obviously, the public broadcaster must remain independent from government influence. The NDP plan for CBC is simple. It's straightforward, it's pragmatic. We will give the corporation the resources it needs to carry out its work. That's it. That means stable, improved, long-term funding, as well as independent process for appointing members of board of directors. We want to put an end to this partisanship and these constant threats and yearly attacks. But I look very forward to the rest of this discussion. Thank you.
The next speaker is Selina. And before she begins, I just want to signal that the only question I have so far is about Remembrance Day, so it has to wait till the end. So bring up the questions to me as they come, please. Selina, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank Ian Morrison and the Friends of the CBC for putting this together. I would also want to thank my fellow candidates for your attending tonight. And I'd like to thank each of you for giving us the opportunity to talk about this very important subject. My name is Selina Caesar-Chavannes, and I'm running to be the next Liberal MP for Whitby Oshawa. I'm a mother of 3 and a resident of Whitby, a business person, and importantly, a fan of CBC. Canadians have a lot to be proud of with their public broadcaster. The CBC on television and radio has been a huge part of our lives. From the sound of Forrest Hewitt, welcoming Canadians and hockey fans in the United States and Newfoundland, to Maple Leaf games each and every Saturday night, to Don and Ron in Coach's Corner. It was the CBC radio that broadcast Prime Minister Mackenzie King's announcement to the country of our invasion of Normandy. And it was Peter Mansbridge just a few weeks ago who calmly reported to Canadians about the terrible events in Ottawa. Public broadcasting in Canada is part of who we are. The CBC helps us to share our stories with each other, and most importantly, it helps to share the Canadian story with the rest of the world. However, the CBC is under attack from the Harper government. We all know this. They have cut funding and attacked the independence of the public broadcaster. They have even given Tony Clements veto power over their collective bargaining. Liberals value the public broadcaster. We will restore funding, and we have publicly committed to restoring funding. The CBC should be a voice of Canadians to Canadians. We cannot allow it to wither away until it becomes nothing but the voice of our government to Canadians. I thank you very much for allowing me to be here this evening, and I look forward to your questions.
Now, Selena, you can't bank those 40 seconds that you didn't use. Craig. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. Just get the microphone checked out. I'm just sitting here realizing that the font on what I've typed out here is far too small for me now, and I'm in need of bifocals. So I've been in denial for a little while about that, but it has arrived. It's okay. It probably just confused me more. I think I'd like to just say thank you, yes, for the invite tonight, and all of the emails that have been sent in support of the CBC. It's lovely to see citizens of this riding gathering together around a common cause, and I happen to subscribe that it's an important cause. What I'm here for tonight too is to gather information, because I am new. I am running to be the MP for the Green Party in this riding. And as a person for the first time going through this type of experience in a by-election, I'm absorbing so much information that it's a little overwhelming at times. But I do have my experience and I do have my story. And the first one that I would share with you right now is I have an 8-year-old son. I am a father and a husband and lived in Whitby for about 10 years. And this past summer, because the CBC has been an important part of my upbringing. I remember my father not coming in from the garage because he's listening to As It Happens when he comes home from work, and my mom screaming, "Where's your dad?" We're Scottish, right? So, and I'd have to run into the garage to see. It's surprising that he didn't carbon monoxide himself by sitting in the car. And I'm a Green Party candidate, but we let our cars idle back then. So the story quickly right now is my son. This past summer we were downtown, and I'd always wanted to take him by the CBC building and share with him, because he watches CBC shows as a child right now, and so I wanted to share with him some of the shows that I watched when I was a child that were a part of my upbringing. And of course we're talking about Mr. Dress Up, and we're talking about The Friendly Giant. And we went down to the archives down at CBC, and we were sitting in there, and he was, it seemed like it was some ancient Egyptian historical artifacts that he was viewing, right? Because he was in awe, and I'm telling him the stories about it. And right at that moment, Suk Yin Lee came by from now I'm forgetting the name of the show. The NTO, definitely not the opera, yes. And she asked if we could have a little talk, because she found it fascinating that we were having a conversation about the CBC. So she did a little clip with us, and that time it was about letter writing and about the lost art of letter writing. And of course my experience was writing back to I'm a first generation Canadian from Scottish immigrants, and so I was telling her about writing to my grandparents back home, and my son's talking about how he emails his teacher. So it was just interesting, and why I tell you that anecdote is because it just sort of encapsulates for me the value of what an independent broadcaster can bring to the table. Thanks.
I thank the candidates for their discipline and brevity. So now we are going to go in a kind of cycling order so that everybody has a fair chance to go first, second, or third. And for the first question, you will go first, Selena, and then Craig will go second, and Trish will go third. Thank you very much. So here is the question. Since the CBC is part of the entertainment industry, do you feel that it should be afforded the same financial consideration as General Motors and other industries? 1 minute.
Thank you for your question. I'm not sure who it came from, but the CBC being afforded the same same considerations as General Motors. CBC needs to be afforded, I think, a little bit more consideration than General Motors. It is a Canadian institution of culture. When we came to Canada as immigrants from Grenada, it is very difficult to understand snow and ice and hockey when you lived in an island that's quite small, population less than Whitby, and quite hot. And my mother used to watch CBC and quickly learned how to play hockey, and taught my brother to do the same thing. And I think that little story describes what CBC's done for my family and what CBC the place it holds in the culture of Canada. So to give it the same consideration as General Motors, I think it needs perhaps a little bit more.
So who is number two? I thought I gave the order.
Right.
It's me next? Okay. Yes, it is. There are simple instructions, but okay. I'm trying to think about the question, and I think what comes to mind right now is that we are talking about two different scenarios. We're talking about the need for stable funding to allow the CBC to maintain its mandate, which is to connect our country, and I'm sure there's a million stories here of how that's done that for people in this room. Comparing it to what we would call a bailout for organizations that are in a different category. I wouldn't say that we're talking about the same thing when we raise this question. So I think it's required that we have stable funding and investment in the CBC. Decisions around policy on whether to help companies, particularly the Green Party. I mean, this bailout for GM, we know that these types of things don't create jobs. We see that they up and turn around once the bailout is taken care of and they leave. So I see it as a different question entirely.
Thank you. As a General Motors employee myself and as a retiree who often feels threatened around investments in manufacturing in particular, I know often far too well what it feels like to have your job threatened. As an individual, as a political representative for our community, I definitely understand the importance of public investment for public good. Good paying jobs, developing the arts and cultures of our community, promoting Canada to Canada from coast to coast to coast is a vital role that we play, that we not only ensure that we have the opportunity to share our shared values, but importantly, to maintain our own independence at definitely an arm's length away from government. So we don't want the interference of government, but we also want to ensure that we have that public infrastructure of our own self-identity, and that is through the CBC.
You don't get to bank the 6 seconds you just said.
6?
Thanks. So the next question is coming to first to Craig, and then to Trish, and then Selena. Okay. Now this is two questions, and I'm grouping them because they seem to be on a common theme. The first says, when and why did the Liberals cut $400 million from the CBC, as has been stated? Question mark. And the second one, which is on the same theme, says, with the huge Liberal cuts to the CBC when in government, how could we trust any Liberal promises re the national treasure now? That's not a nonpartisan question, is it? So please proceed.
Okay. When it comes to funding and numbers, I am not necessarily armed with numbers to bandy things about, but I do have some information that has been provided to me that has come from the Green Party in press releases previously. These are recent from the summer. So, you know, funding cuts since the 1990s with the Liberal government eliminating, yes, this is where we hear $400 million in funding, with the resulting loss in 1 in 3 CBC jobs, and a continued cut with the subsequent Harper government, resulting in about 800 staff being cut. And continued cuts seriously undermine the mandate of the CBC. I would say that the Green Party is resolved to providing stable funding, complete independence from government interference, and if elected, I would work to diligently restore this mandate.
Thank you.
Yes, I have done some of this research. When and why did the Liberal Conservative cuts happen? It was, again, here noted, and there's a chart that you can find online that identifies, and I've heard the stories of the cuts that Chrétien has made to the CBC. And in fact, pre-election, he did say, in fact, he would not cut the CBC, and shortly thereafter, he did, in fact, make the cuts, and had the president of CBC quit when that happened. So we know that there is a history of the Liberal cuts, but today I believe it's more so of an ideology that the Harper government has. So a very different issue here that we're faced with when the hands of government wants control of the message. So that's what I feel is the threat today. And would I trust that the Liberals would be any different? I haven't seen any policies around the Liberals. And as Selena sits here tonight to say they support them, do we have to take her word for it? I don't know.
So I will not reiterate. There is the literature in here, and I think most of you know that the Liberals in the 90s did cut the CBC spending, and that was to balance the budget. And sometimes that needs to happen. One of the things that the Liberal Party is not going to do is to interfere with the integrity and the mandate of the CBC. That is something that we have firmly stood for. So the second part to the question was, with these huge cuts, can we trust the Liberals? Well, when the cuts were made and the budget was balanced, we did restore funding back to the CBC, and probably not to the levels that it was, but to levels that will that could sustain it. And one of the things that I think we do need to remember is that the CBC needs to be provided continuous, stable funding in order to achieve its mandate. And that's something that the Liberal Party will stick by.
Thanks. The candidates are behaving very responsibly towards the rules, and that I like that because it makes my job easier. Yeah. This is a related question. Moves away from the partisanship, but it picks up on, and that's why I took it next. How would your party ensure the independence from government interference, that independence from government interference is achieved? And since there's a signature on this, I'll say it's Joe Visconti, a person who's known to me, who wrote this question. So now, in the third question, we're going Trish first, then Selena, and then Craig.
Yes, with the NDP's position is in fact that we would ensure that the Treasury Board not have the authority to dictate agreements of employees at the collective bargaining. We know that the Conservatives have been trying to take away the ability for CBC journalists to protect their sources, and I think that's at the front line of how the organization is administrated. So not only is it important that you become independent from government influence, but you also have to allow them to appoint their own board of directors, and that's the position of the NDP, not mine.
To ensure the independence, the Liberal Party of Canada will has responded to this question with an agreement to repeal Bill C-60. As a person who has worked on boards, in particular one with the University of Toronto, our most important mandate was to find a president of the university that was based on merit and their ability to do the job. That should not be, government appointments should be based on merit and talent and not patronage and partisan affiliation. So regarding the rules about hiring and firing the CBC president, we believe that consideration should be given and placed to the responsibility in the hands of the boards of the CBC. and that the board should not be stacked with any partisan membership in order to influence that decision unduly.
Over to me. Okay, I'm going to keep this one fairly simple because just recently the Green Party in the summer has declared a resolution. The resolution recognizes the merits and the need for a reliable, independent public broadcaster. It complements policy that's been unchanged for the Green Party since 1998, pledging financial support for the CBC. Be it resolved that we will legislate independence of the CBC from political interference. So I believe that if we start with legislation, then this will give some oomph to any further interference on the part of any government. Thank you.
Thanks. The fourth question will go first Selena, then Craig, and then Trish. Okay, and they are mandated, by the way, if I get this order wrong, to correct me. Okay, yeah. CBC investigates journalistic issues that Canadians care about in their lives, and including things like scandals like pharmaceutical corruption or deadly cars or things, and I have a handwriting problem with the last part of it. Do you want to shout that out to me?
Does CBC acts in Canada's public interest?
Yeah, the CBC is supposed to act in Canada's public interest. What will you do to evolve, to enhance, and to extend our public broadcasters' resources and autonomy? Now, there's an element of duplication. I mean, it's inevitable that questions will duplicate, so you can find what you want in that question and use the minute or less on it.
Sorry, the last part of the question?
Sure, I'll just read it again. CBC investigates journalists and saves Canadian lives and money, and then the reference to pharmaceutical corruption, deadly cars, etc. And then CBC does act as Canada's public interest. That's a statement. The question: what will you do to evolve, enhance, and extend our public broadcasters' resources and autonomy? I'm aware that that question has been partially handled, but there are elements in it that are different. So you have a minute.
Oh, okay. So we do understand the value that this CBC does bring to Canadian broadcasting across from coast to coast in French and English and Aboriginal languages. So our party remains steadfast in support of stable long-term funding for the CBC and Radio Canada. And so the national broadcaster can continue to broadcast unique Canadian programming that affects us as a nation. And I think that it's more than just how it affects us across the country. It is our local stations as well that we need to make sure that we are mindful of. Again, we do not support the government interference, and having an arm's length approach to ensuring that that the CBC stays independent is something that we do hold dear, and we want to make sure that continues.
I think I'm next, Ian. I got it right. Yes, I would echo the enhanced, not just the restoring the CBC funding to where it needs to be in order for it to be responsible and have the resources to do the investigative reporting it needs to do. I think of shows like Marketplace or W5 that are doing things. I think this speaks to a higher, not W5, sorry, that's CFTO. I'll be okay. When you're wrong, you must admit it, right? Where I'm going with this is I think that we have created a climate where there is a little bit of paranoia in government, where we've created, the Canada that I grew up in is compassionate, it's open, it's willing to have an open and honest debate about issues that are taking place in our society. And I think there has been, especially over the last years of the current government, a real move to try to quash that free and open discussion about things that are objectionable, things that are problematic as we move forward. And I don't think that we need to keep ideology as a role within the CBC. Okay.
Yes, I think one of the glaring pieces that jump out at me on the problem that is problematic when public broadcasters have the opportunity to do investigative reporting and in-depth clarifying what is in fact going on in government per se. We have to be concerned today, I think, with the move that the government has made to appoint board of directors. I think that's the most glaring problem that I have and our party has. So to remove that appointment process and allow them to have full control of the board of directors, that is, I think, paramount beyond restoring full funding, a restoration of funding, not simply putting money back in when they see is so willing, but to restore that funding so that it's sustainable and that it's not starved for advertisements or open to private influence.
On this occasion, Craig, you're going to go first, followed by Trish and then Selena, okay? I'm combining a couple of questions here. They overlap, but I've got a lot of paper here and we have limited time, so I'm trying to condense. What do you think is the value of CBC? And secondly, CBC Radio now has ads on it. What will happen to these ads if you get elected?
Just to be clear, I clearly meant the Fifth Estate before, okay?
It's the first mistake you've ever made.
Yeah. Okay, value. I don't even know where to begin with that one in terms of what we've already spoken about, and that's transparent, open dialogue about real issues, about real events that are happening within our country without the interference of governments. That's the CBC that I grew up with. That's the legacy that was left from my father that I hope to instill in my son. So I think it's a valuable educational tool for our public. When I work with young people and I actually try to talk to them about the CBC, and then I'm listening to this show on the way in from work, and I must admit it does sadden me at times that they're not entirely aware that the CBC programming is there and it's available to them. And I think that's a consequence of the lack of funding and the lack of education and putting it out there that that's what's happening. As far as ads go, when I first started hearing ads I listened to 94.1 and I like the music there, and I think that that's something that we would work to remove from the broadcast.
Yes, in terms of value of the CBC, I'm a big proponent of good jobs. And as a public broadcaster, we know with the starving of funding to the CBC, it has eliminated thousands of jobs and will continue to eliminate thousands of jobs. These are jobs, in fact, where our young people today have looked to their future, creative futures. We need to be able to have a sustainable talent, sustainable culture, an opportunity for our young people today to express themselves. Beyond the importance of having transparent and honest and open dialogue of the issues that affect us as Canadians. I understand that we are 186 on the world stage when it comes to public funding broadcasting. We are at the bottom of the list of countries that have an investment in public broadcasting. I value the CBC and I will fight to ensure, alongside of the strong opposition of the NDP, to restore public funding.
Well, I spoke a little bit earlier of how my mom valued the CBC as new immigrants to Canada. But the CBC, the value that it brings, it provides an opportunity for our nation to come together. And I did bring it up earlier, but after the tragedy in Ottawa, Canadians and the international audience spoke about the reflective manner in which the tragedy was reported on the CBC. That is our treasure. That Canadian perspective, that unbiased, nonpartisan, no fear-mongering, thoughtful broadcasting is what the Liberal Party of Canada has supported and what the Liberal Party of Canada wants in the CBC. And that's That's the value that the CBC brings to each and every one of us across the country. Now, with respect to the radio ads, I'm not going to pretend that I am a broadcaster, but what I will tell you is that the CBC needs to define itself and possibly redefine itself, and using those ads may help to contribute to some of the cost cuts.
So now we are starting with Trish, and then Selena, and then Craig. Okay. I've got 3 cards together here, and I hope you see the drift. I think they're connected because every time I try to get rid of some cards, more keep showing up. Right? So question 1, but they're related. There's a money theme here. Will you increase the financial support to CBC? Our nation is near the bottom, 3rd from the bottom of the list for countries that support their national broadcasters. That's question 1. Question 2. When the time comes to do some, quote, balancing of our budget, will CBC be back on the chopping block? And number 3, will you consider any changes to the funding model? For example, a cable surcharge, fundraising, etc. So there's some stuff.
I think I did answer a part of that in part of my other comments. Just in terms of will the CBC be on the chopping block? Our position as the NDP has been a strong supporter of public infrastructure, social infrastructure. This, as a CBC organization, and the delivery of the information that that we value, is another social program. We find a way in which we budget ourselves to ensure that we create an inclusive environment, an opportunity for people to have shared cultural experiences, and I think the CBC is the crux of what we do, and all other social programs. It shouldn't be on the chopping block, and it should not feel that threat. There has to be budgetary issues, then it certainly wouldn't be on the backs of the CBC. We know that there are other organizations making a lot more money in the private sphere in media, and that should be we should be addressing those tax cuts for those corporations.
So increasing financial support to the CBC, as I did state earlier, we do support stable long-term funding of CBC, and so that the broadcaster can continue its unique Canadian programming. With respect to balancing the budget on the backs of the CBC is an important service, much like schools and hospitals, and it's part of our cultural identity. I think it's important, and I'll have to agree with Trish here, that if we could find funding or ways in which to create sustainable funding for our other national treasures, it should be a priority for us to do so for the CBC as well. Changes to the funding model, that involves a conversation. That involves a conversation with CBC and other partners at the table to ensure that we have a sustainable funding strategy for a very long time.
Okay, increase in funding, yes. Balancing budget, that's an interesting question in the sense of the CBC needs to be left alone to make its own decisions independently. And I think that would include
myself. I know, working with a strong caucus of the NDP, whom many of those MPs I know personally, they pride themselves on public delivery of goods and arm's length of government. So I know I share those same values with our caucus, and I would work very, very closely with our community to ensure that they understand the importance of having an independent public broadcaster without interference.
So I alluded to part of this statement in a previous answer, but I'll reiterate it for the purposes of this question. Government appointments should be based on merit and talent, and patronage and partisan affiliation should not be part of that process. Regarding the changing in the rules to power to hire the president of the CBC, we, the Liberal Party of Canada, and Justin Trudeau believe that consideration should be given to placing this responsibility in the hands of the board of directors, as in the case with other corporations in Canada and elsewhere. Should a change, such a change would no doubt to help it to strengthen the arm's length relationship that exists between the CBC and the government, a relationship which the Conservatives have gone out of their way to undermine. Myself, I value board stewardship, and the mandate of the board is to look to protecting the organization, and I will ensure that that is kept.
Right now, sorry, I'm just having an inner smile about imagining Elizabeth May as the Prime Minister of the country. I think that would be a good thing. I might as well just say that. Regardless of what's going on in politics, one of the inspirations for me in getting involved and why I'm here and why I'm doing this and engaging in this process is that she has truly inspired me in terms of her belief in democracy, which is what I think we're actually talking about when we talk about patronage appointments and we talk about people getting appointed to boards by people who have self-interests that propagate their own agenda. So obviously we need to swing away from that, and Elizabeth, for me, especially running as a candidate within the party, really truly believes in constituent representation, and I think that just parallels the idea that we obviously would not support patronage appointments, and the board independently would be the decision makers as to the presidency. So again, voting for a leader is a new dynamic that I would like us to see us move away from. Thank you.
Sorry, my machine wasn't listening to me. Now we're into, and by the way, I think we're down to the last 2 or 3 questions, and I am going to find time for the non-public broadcasting question in just a few minutes. So now we're down to the cycle of Selena first, then Craig, then Trish, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So here are 2 questions. I'm just trying to pack them in. There's no real logic to linking these together. How is Canadian content defined? How is it monitored or controlled? So that's one. And secondly, I am an avid fan of Radio-Canada. I'm not a francophone, but I value quality, and I also care a great deal about Radio-Canada. There have been no commercials thus far there. What would your party do to restore Radio-Canada's presence in Canada today? So there's a couple of miscellaneous questions that I fit into one.
So I believe the first question was about the how is Canadian content defined. So I would say that Canadian content is defined by what brings us together as a nation. It's defined on cultural and historical context and stories that we could talk about together, and as long as we're able to see ourselves in those stories at some point in our history here in Canada, whether it's someone who was born here or someone who immigrated here, whether you could see yourself defined in those stories makes it true Canadian content. Restore Radio-Canada was the second question. We know that at least 40% of us listen to Radio-Canada, and in order to restore that station without having the ads, it's important to, again, have those conversations with partners at the table to ensure that we provide that sustainable funding. It's not a simple resolution to ensuring that this problem doesn't keep coming up and we don't keep having this conversation over and over again. We need to ensure that there is the capability to have that sustainable funding for a very long time, and that involves a conversation much broader than the one that we're having tonight.
That was me. I forgot. Is it me next?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're just whispering.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if it was my turn. Sorry. I just checked off and put a question mark because I'm going to have to educate myself more on what are the current CanCon requirements, which I can't reiterate for you. But what I can speak to is what resonates with me as a Canadian. And in believing that the CBC informs and educates Canadians, not only on Canadian issues, but our place within the global context as well, and to know sort of how we relate. And when we limit the message and we try to create a message, that isolates us from the rest of the world. And I think we can all agree that we're moving in a more global direction, and we need to be informed as to what's going on outside of us as well as what's going on inside of us, and how that relates to our country and the decisions that we make. I have a son in French immersion. That now he is at a stage in grade 3 where he can speak and say things, and I'm pretty sure he's making fun of me, but I'm not sure. But this has been a commitment that my wife and I have made to try to wrestle better control of the French language. I did go through it in the Ontario school system, but it's amazing how much I've forgotten. But that's been an inspiration, and clearly Radio Canada, he listens to French programming and French radio, because we know that helps him better grasp the language, and it's just jumped him far away. So, I mean, that's just been a lesson on the ground level for me, is the importance of Radio Canada.
Okay, in terms of how the CBC is defined, I see that the CBC is defined as it allows us to exemplify ourselves as a free and democratic country from coast to coast. Globally, it sends a message where I think from a common cause, that we have a united voice, and that we are able to broadcast to other countries what Canada is and what we value. How is it controlled? In terms of the opportunities that public broadcasting brings, is that it is about being transparent, and it is a public opportunity, or public place in which opportunity grows from. It responds to the needs of Canadians. And what in terms of the value of the quality, I know that when we can invest in the CBC, both locally and regionally, that the value of the quality is that reflective of our own situations in the communities that we stand in today. So
thank you. As I see it now, we have time for 2 more questions, and you'll see me trying to jam the questions together. First, I just received one that says, "What partners do you mean?" And taken out of context, that's a little hard for a candidate to answer. Whoever said that, could you just clarify what you had in mind?
I just meant partners.
Okay. So, Celine, maybe you could, in the context of your 1 minute, include talking about the partners. I'm grateful to the person who wrote a quite long question to say, if this is too long, just read the last paragraph. And that last paragraph says, which party candidate has the courage to pass a law that CBC budget mirrors the rate of inflation? And then the final broadcasting question is, has a preamble. A nation can be said to rest on a three-legged stool, cultural, social, and physical. I'm condensing the question. How can a government you claim to have a national vision when it has been cutting on all 3? This obviously is applying to the Conservative government, I suppose. More concerned about corporate interest rather than the national interest. Focus on the answer, and please talk about the CBC. So that's the basket of the questions, and that'll be it on public broadcasting. And then we have one unrelated question before we get to the final comments. This one begins with. I've run out of my note space here. I think me. This is this Selena first, and then Craig, and then Trish. Okay.
I'm going to start by answering the question related to partners. So when I talk about partners, I've always in my career have had researchers or the experts at the table. Obviously, the organization that's being affected, the CBC, but we also have Canadians as partners. You and I as partners at the table, as stakeholders in the longevity and how the CBC gets funded and is sustainable. So ensuring that you have all stakeholders at the table, perhaps I'm using the word partners, but stakeholders at the table, which includes Canadians, is vitally important. It can't be a top-down decision that's brought in from government. It should be a decision. If it's a true cultural institution, it should be valued by all Canadians, and input on the sustainability should be recognized by all Canadians. Okay. And now. Sorry, am I going with the next question?
Well, I think you just use the 1 minute as you see fit, so we'll carry on.
Okay, I think the CBC for me is emblematic of that notion of working together. I think that, so when we think about our social, cultural, physical welfare as a nation, I think that that's sort of what the CBC represents, and it has that capacity for us to grow in those areas. As far as whether the rate of inflation should match the funding to the CBC, I am not an economist. I would say if I was representing the constituents and I needed to carry voice forward into Parliament Hill, I would have to gather more information, get more detailed feedback from the community to find out, okay, is this indeed something that we want to put forward? And certainly if that's what it's decided on. And that's what I meant by the true democratic representation at the constituent level, is you're not voting for a leader, you're voting for someone who is going to be responsive to the local community. And if that's an issue that needs to come forward to develop good policy as to whether that's the right thing to do, then that's the way that I would operate as your MP.
Yes, I truly understand in terms of the three-legged stool and where we need to understand when cuts are made, but on the global scale, public broadcasting, when we sit at well below, I think it's 189 on the world stage, we have to know that if we continue to starve the public broadcaster to death, then we lose so much more of value, regardless of these three-legged stools and however what has shaped the CBC as it is today. But we have competition out there, and if we don't rise and invest in the CBC, then we'll have no stool at all, right? And this is the agenda of the Harper government, is just to simply get rid of the CBC and privatize something more like Sun News. Make no mistake, this is the direction. Whether it's the CBC or other social programs, or if it's a four-legged stool, what have you, we have to get back. If we have to be afraid of negotiating funding on the rate of inflation, then we have real problems.
Now, this is the last question, and it is not about public broadcasting, this will. I've got my notes here, and I've run out of space to keep track of it. Since you went first, this will be Selena first, eh? Selena, and then Craig, and no.
She went first last time.
Okay, fine. Thank you. What is your position on Remembrance Day as a national holiday? Remembrance Day should not be a holiday. That is, kids should be in school for Remembrance Day ceremonies. It is a day of solemn remembrance. So just your comments on Remembrance Day and its status as a holiday.
Okay, so for me, again, my experience growing up with Remembrance Day and the power of that day, and I just experienced it again with my son, was that being in school and sharing that with his classmates and the school system, and having that place as a forum for them to stop and remember, is how I would personally like to continue to see it happen. I'm open to further conversations about that. I don't think that the Green Party has, as far as I'm aware at this point in time, a position on moving to have Remembrance Day as a national holiday. But personally, at this moment in time, it is not something that I would subscribe to or see the value in terms of a holiday. I think that there's more meaningfulness. I know there was for me as a personal experience. When I was down at the Cenotaph the other day for Remembrance Day, there was groups of students coming down and participating and doing it as a social, cultural remembrance together, so that there's community building and remembering. So I see the value in that as it stands right now. Thanks.
I am, as a proud New Democrat, we have a Member of Parliament, Dan Harris, has just presented a private member's bill to nationalize the holiday for Remembrance Day. And I stand in solidarity with our members of Parliament of the NDP to support that. This has been a long time coming. We know that the erosion of a unity and the support that we have for veterans has been at risk. The Harper government cutting veterans affairs, you know, with the history that is around veterans today, and again, veterans from Afghanistan, current events. We know that we have to keep our history alive. Having been at recent, every Remembrance Day, in fact, as I go to our own community to honor those brave people who have fought for our democracy, I believe that having my children with me at that event would be most beautiful.
Remembrance Day is a national holiday. This past Remembrance Day, like every other one before my children go to school, and most mornings, in fact, we talked about who do you know that's serving, and they mentioned their uncles and aunts here in Canada and in the United States that are currently serving, and when they come home after the school day and talk about the assembly that they were at, or my son brings home a cross with the poppies on it, or my daughter brings home a project or an essay that she's written, it really helps to re-emphasize the importance of those who have given their lives in service of others. And making it a national holiday, I don't think will have the same effect.
So we're now at the place where we get into the concluding statements, and we'll take them in the reverse order to the opening statements, which according to my records means that Craig will go first, followed by Selena, and finally Trish. 2 minutes max. Thanks.
Okay. Like many people here, I personally believe that Canada needs a strong public broadcaster with stable funding and complete independence from the government. And I don't think that the costs of doing this, when we see so much waste in other areas, and we do often have this thing that we have cutbacks and whatnot, but when I personally go home and watch TV commercials on spending for the Conservative government in particular, and I see that we have to tighten our budget in other areas, I really, frankly, personally find that offensive and a misuse of our public funds if we're going to talk about what's right or wrong. It does cost us pennies per day for Canadians to maintain this vital national institution. Right now there is a House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage that's recommended increasing some CBC funding, and this was declined. And our Deputy Leader Adrian Carr has quote unquote said, the protecting the CBC is part of supporting democracy in this country, part of allowing us to share ideas across the country, and it's part of our national identity. And I would support that as your MP and as a Green MP on Parliament Hill. Thanks for having me this evening.
Like Craig, this is my first political campaign, and my experience in the campaign has really demonstrated to me how partisanship can make people behave. Sometimes it can encourage you to be divided on issues where there doesn't need to be as much division. And we sit here today with my colleagues, and we're coming from different angles, but we all want the same things. We want our kids to be safe, we want good health care, we want meaningful employment, and we are more common than we are different. It is the CBC provides an opportunity for those commonalities, those Canadian values, to really come to the surface It allows us to sit around the table or the water cooler and have meaningful conversation about public broadcasting or what we've heard over the CBC during the day. We need public broadcasting. We need the CBC. And every day we are reminded of the value that we have in this particular Canadian treasure, and we remind the world of just exactly what leaders we are when we do so. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm looking forward to your support in becoming the next MP for Whitby Oshawa. Thank you.
Yes, I would just like to express, in fact, with the CBC, as it provides a medium for young and old, we know that the culture of our youth today are dependent on broadcasters today that promote our unity across coast to coast. But most importantly, we know that our legacy and our cultural affinity with Canada needs to be documented, those stories need to be told, and we can count on the CBC to do that. In all seriousness and in all fun, whether it's Mr. Dress Up or This Hour Has 22 Minutes or the good old hockey game, this is our culture and it should not be at risk. CBC is what all Canadians have in common, from shores to shores and in our homes and in places that we cherish on our lovely couch. CBC is part of our legacy. We need to protect it. There is interference, political interference, and I'm asking you today that regardless of our love-in for CBC, Mr. Harper will still be the Prime Minister on November 18th. What you can do is, in fact, vote something very different. Send a message who, in fact, supports the CBC, like no other party, is the NDP. So as your representative of the community, I would hope that you would stand with me and send a strong message to support Tom Mulcair and our caucus and elect me on November 17th. Trish McAuliffe. Thank you.
So I want to just say, please do vote on November 17th for the candidate of your choice. There are several Friends volunteers that I wanted to personally thank. The three that I will mention by name are Gary Rock and Ron Loken, and also Joe Visconti, who posed one of the questions. But there are others, and I just want to thank you for your part in bringing this issue into the election. And finally, I just wanted to I wanted to say thank you to each one of you for investing the time to come here tonight, your valuable time, the first day of winter apparently. And I want to call on Ron to present a little token of our appreciation to the three candidates who came.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Ian Morrison for making this event possible. And of course, to thank our esteemed candidates who agreed to attend, because as you know, without them, there would be no debate. So I'd like to present three little scrapers. Last and not least, you, the audience, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come out of your warm homes and to come out in the cold of this night. You and people like you are the foundation upon which our democracy is built. Thank you again, and good night.